This morning we're going to be looking in the Word of God at the patience test. When you and I became Christians, we often thought that things would change, or rather sometimes people would have us believe that our life would be amazing. Yet what we find is that an entirely different set of skills and character traits are essential for development. We live in a society that is microwaving everything. Information now is sent down by 30-second clips, and we scroll through material because our attention span has become so severely impeded that anything over 30 seconds we become bored. Yet God requires of us to be patient. He wants us to develop an entirely new set of skills in our relationship with God. And so this morning we speak about the importance of patience, especially with the Exodus account as backdrop, but also in the here and now as we exit our captivity in sin and walk with God in a newness of life. We had the other day, we celebrated Mother's Day, a wonderful day. And one of the things that I love is an African proverb that says, patience is the mother of a beautiful child. And here again, it's the idea that we need to be patient because God is birthing something new. Henri Nouwen made a comment in one of his books. He said, a waiting person is a patient person. The word patience means the willingness to stay where we are and live the situation out to the full in the belief that something hidden there will manifest itself in us. As good parents, we find that our children often exhibit impatience. They want things now, they want things on their terms, and they would like it to be the way they want it to be. However, we discovered in our study last week that so often we find that certain things present itself to us that is just a test. A test for us to be able to make the right decision, the righteous decision, and to live a life of faith. And then we also discovered that there are some other challenges that do occur in our lives where we have to live through protracted trials. And these are often protracted and very difficult to navigate. But what we find is that the Israelites had a similar experience in the wilderness. And for them it was very difficult because of a journey which probably could have taken a few days or a few weeks had been extensively extended over 40 years. But there were three fundamental questions that were answered by God during that time. And also in our study last week, we asked these questions. Do you really trust God? And the question is, amidst all the challenges that you're experiencing, are you going to obey God? And the third one that we just commemorated was, are you going to remember God, what He has done in your past? And are you going to look forward to what God has for your future? We look at the test that God would place on His faithful. We look at the test of God as He dealt with Abraham. Abraham was placed before him a test. Will you follow me out of Ur, and will you be obedient? We watched how he faced a difficult test where he literally took his son up onto Mount Sinai, the only son to sacrifice him under God's command. It was certainly a difficult test. But when God first came to Abraham, He spoke to him and said to him, I'm going to give you 3 promises. He would have his descendants that will form a great nation. God would have him look up in the stars and say, I will give you as many children as you can see in the heavens, and more than the sand on the seashores. God would give Abraham's family entrance into the land of Canaan that he would live in. God would bless the entire world through Abraham's descendants, which we now know through Jesus Christ. And for us, it is important to understand that when God makes a promise, He intends to fulfill it. On this basis, we find that there are 3 promises, but it involved a lot of waiting. It would be 400 years before Abraham even would own any land. We find that it was that even 400 years before they grew to even be a significant nation. And the reality is that Abraham never saw it. During his lifetime, he didn't even own a tract of land, and only 440 years later, they received Canaan to his descendants. Abraham didn't see that either. It was approximately 1900 years before Jesus would come to this earth to die on the cross, to provide salvation to this world, that Abraham was told by God that he would do. And so Hebrews chapter 11 says, from verse 8 and through 9 and 13, it was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and to go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going, and even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. All these people died still believing that God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it. Hebrews 6 says, from verse 13 to 15, so when God made a promise to Abraham, he swore by himself, saying, surely I will bless you and I will multiply you. And thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. I want you to pick up the import of that text with hindsight in the book of Hebrews, where the writer would say that Abraham patiently waited. He patiently waited for God to fulfill his promise. And so from all of our hearts, we often find that there is an injunction against God to say, hold it, but you promised. And in our mind, the thinking is that we want to see that reality blossom in our lives. But the reality is that it probably might not happen in our lives. But certainly it will happen in our lineage to those who will follow us in the faith of Abraham. God would come to him as well and say to him that I would give you a son. But there was a problem. He was 75 years old and Sarah was 65 years old, and they had no children. They probably would do what married people do, but she never got pregnant. And the odds against them having children now at her age were growing slimmer and slimmer by the day. In other words, also from their side, one can understand their skepticism about God being able to fulfill his promise. At that point, Abraham was 85 years old, and she was still not pregnant. She basically said, Abraham, God told you that you would have a son, but he didn't tell me that I would. And so she came up with plan B. Ishmael was born. But that wasn't God's plan. 13 more years would go by, and Abram and Sarah still didn't have a child. Abram was 99 years old, and Sarah was 89 years old, and God came to them, and he said, this time next year you'll have a son. But that too was unbelievable. It was so absurd that we found that Sarah laughed because she'd been barren for so many years. And the possibility of conception was completely out of her frame of reference. I want you to know that that is exactly what happens to all of us. Is that sometimes because it is out of our frame of reference or our expectancy of possibility, we discard it and we become cynical. 1 year later, Isaac was born. After 25 years of God telling him, he finally had the child. Hebrews 6 verse 15. And thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. I think that is probably one of the most difficult texts anybody would have to go through. I believe it is in the desire of every single woman to have a child. To be able to have a child in their arms, to comfort, to cuddle, and to be able to change the nappies. We live in a world that is so fast. The other day, Sue ordered something for Victoria, and she asked, have you received the parcel? She said, no. And then she said, I'll check. And on her app, she found out that the parcel had been delivered 2 days ago. She went outside to the door, and there was the parcel on the stoop 2 days ago. Now, we find that we live in such a very quick environment that we want to not delay gratification. And so we want to be easily pleased, and so we get microwave ovens. And so we also get pressure cookers that can accelerate the possibility to finish food. I remember in my day as a young child, and I'm sure you do too, when our parents started cooking in the morning. And on a slow stove, the food would cook. You see, God is one that cannot be hastened. The Bible tells us about waiting on God, especially in the Psalms. Psalms 25 verse 5 says, lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are God of my salvation. On you I wait all the day. Psalms 37 verse 7 through 9 says, rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who brings wicked schemes to pass. Do not fret. It only causes harm. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord shall inherit the earth. Micah chapter 7 verse 7. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. Sorry, that was Psalms 40 verse 1. Micah 7 verse 7 says, therefore I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. What do we find very important in terms of waiting on God? We find with God is that so often it is because we have some unmet needs. Unmet needs that really struggle, and we are frustrated because they are just not coming. We look for validation from those who we feel should be able to validate because we haven't had that in our childhood. And sometimes we then wait and we waste our time away. Maybe today you're feeling and struggling with depression. You might feel that your life has no purpose, there's no reason for being joyful. And then you might ask the question quite fairly, what do you mean about waiting for God? What do you mean by that? You don't know what I've gone through. Maybe that today there's somebody who's waiting for God to restore relationships. Maybe waiting for somebody to ask forgiveness for what they've done and how they've hurt you. And maybe today you are waiting in vain because maybe the person has moved right along, or even the person has died. And maybe you're waiting for God to soften their hearts. And maybe you're on the other end, you have wronged somebody. You hold a terrible grudge and you're living with anger that is causing cancer in your heart and jealousy that is eating away at your soul. And you just can't seem to get over it. You feel that waiting on God is a waste of time. You feel that it's futile. And you probably feel that I need to give up on that. You're waiting for those wonderful words of I forgive you from someone that you've hurt. What do you do then while you're waiting for God? Maybe it's a teenager who's waiting for God in a culture where there seems to be instant gratification in so many ways. You can access so many things that could give you that. You are filled with a culture that deals with vulgarity, with crudeness and disrespect of parents and also for other humans. Maybe you're a teenager waiting to reject the pressures of the media, but you are caught between Scylla and Charybdis, the difficult choices you have to make and navigate. Maybe you're waiting for God to provide justice because you've been in court for so long. You feel, why is God taking so long? Maybe you're waiting today that somehow your ship will come in. Or someone will be sympathetic to what you have lost many years ago. Maybe you're waiting for an equal opportunity to have a job. Or recognized for your skills rather than by the color of your skin. Maybe all you need is to find that you are recognized for your basic dignity. That you want to be treated equally before the law in a country that you love. What do you do when you find yourself waiting for God, is the question. And then there are those who are waiting for peace. We pray for peace, but none of us actually knows a world of peace. We find countries at war with one another, and we're still unclear as to why this has happened. We still are unclear why wars are going on, and things that actually need to be warred against are proliferating in our environments. We ask the question, why are people still going hungry in a country that can bail out an absolute decrepit state with billions of rands yearly? They can load onto a country that the willing taxpayers unfairly and fleece continually, and there is no justice. You may be in that position where you're crying out to God, why? Why are these things going on? How come it is in a country with so much so much resources that we still find that are people without electricity? That 40 odd years later, in a democracy that we've yearned and prayed for, we find that people are still homeless. People are still not having running water. They are still living out of pit toilets. And those who are placed in positions of influence make no attempt to take accountability and to actually deal with things, but try to blame other people for jobs that they should have done. The words of the Bible cries out in my heart daily when I read the word of God. When David, it's said about David in Acts chapter 13, that David was faithful to God in his generation. We try to find reasons for lapses of judgment. Yet we ask the question, what do we do when we are waiting for God? Find in Acts chapter 1, it's a chapter the disciples are waiting. We find that Jesus spent 40 days with his disciples in Acts chapter 1, and he speaks to them. In Acts chapter 1 and verse 4, and being assembled together with them, he commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait for the promise of the Father. Especially, they had to wait for the pouring out of the Holy Spirit, which would come in Acts chapter 2. But the disciples didn't know that. They were completely confused. They thought this was going to occur within a matter of hours or days or months or even years. You see, when Jesus says wait, he means wait. It's interesting to find in Matthew chapter 24 when people ask about the end times, Jesus says no one knows those things except God. In other words, Jesus was communicating to them that in the grand scheme of things, there is a grand architect, and that man is God, and not you or I can predict or even try to postulate when that is going to occur. But there's a few things that we can do while we are waiting on God. The first one is to realize that God will act in his own time. In Acts chapter 1, the disciples got a bit anxious. And here in verse 6, they try to speculate exactly what Jesus is going to do. And that's exactly what all of us sometimes do. We feel that we can figure God out and we can say, hang on, this is what's going to happen now. So in verse 6, they say the following, are you getting ready to restore the kingdom? In other words, how long do we have to wait? Is this when you're going to restore and give us the glory days that we were waiting for? In verse 7, it is said, Jesus answers him, he says, not for you to know the times or seasons which the Father has put in his own authority. In other words, what Jesus Christ is saying to his disciples, I'm not going to tell you how long you're going to have to wait. God will do things in his own time. You don't have to worry how long it's going to take, and don't think you're going to push him, and don't think you are going to accelerate his decision making and when it's going to occur. But it's hard to wait. It's hard to wait when you've been praying for somebody to obey the gospel of Christ and turn their life to God, but God says you will have to wait. I love the book of Habakkuk. And in this book, it is not a very long book and only got 3 chapters, but it reflects the honest trials and struggles of a prophet with God, asking him the fundamental question you and I are asking today and saying, Lord, why? Why? When is this going to stop? Habakkuk asked a question about God's people. He says to them, how long are you, Lord of glory, going to allow this stuff to carry on? They were lying, cheating, and stealing. He cried out to God and said, "O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear?" What he was actually saying, Lord, I'm tired of waiting. I want you to do something. I've been praying and appealing to you daily that you would make sure that this situation will come to a close. And I will keep waiting. What are you doing about it? And God would say to him in response, don't worry. I'm God and you are not. I will take care of it in my own time. And then he shocks Habakkuk and he says to them, I'm going to bring the Babylonians and use them to punish the Jews. Whoa, 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 whoa. Excuse me? And I can imagine that Habakkuk says, wait a minute. You can't do that. As wicked as the Jews are and the Babylonians are, even worse. Surely there must be another way. God says, I will take care of things my own way in my own time. What we knew about the Babylonians, brethren, if you read history, when they take people into captivity, they would literally take you into captivity. They will cut off all the hair, men, women, and child. They will tie them with ropes or strings or even with chains, one arm to the next. And what they would do is when people start going slowly, they would be on horseback. And people are slow, they would have large gaffs like fishhooks, and they will grab them into the back of people and drag them along. And when people died in that convoy, they have to drag the dead. But Habakkuk says this in Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 17 to 18, when he realizes that if I ask God for something, God will certainly answer it in his way and in his time. And he says this. I love the way that he reaches a point where he says, I have come to the conclusion, and I'm paraphrasing that part, that even though the fig tree has no blossoms, and there are no grapes on the vines, even though the olive crop fails, and the field lies empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields, and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. In other words, he says that if everything else is taken away and everything else that I am hopeful on seasonally does not come to fruition, I will trust that the one thing is true, that God is alive, and I will find my joy in the one thing that excludes everything physical on this world, and that is in God. Let's get back to Acts chapter 1. Waiting for God should be a time of activity. We somehow think that we need to sit and twiddle our thumbs and wait for God. They all continued in one accord in verse 14 to pray. And tonight we're going to pray. Tonight we're going to sing and pray in one accord. Verse 15, we find Peter stood up and told the rest, he says, that we need to replace with a new apostle. And that's what they did. They sat down and assessed what would the qualities be of someone that could stand in the place of Judas that now has just tragically exited that position. We need to have that position filled. They had two candidates. And then they did what they knew, and they cast lots to allow God to choose between these two men. What we need to learn is that despite of your circumstances, do what God has told you to do, and do that right. Seek his face in everything that you do, and do what he has revealed to you that needs to be done. We need to start praying as the disciples did. It means doing while we are waiting. You see, we can investigate options, we can get better training, we can talk to other people, listen to suggestions, pray for guidance. But we are patient. But we are doing what we're doing. Somebody asked me the other day, how do you live? Very simply. I work as if everything depends on me. And I trust God as if everything depends on him. In other words, my feeling is, I know what I must do, and I do it to the best of my ability. We don't skimp on God. You do your best every single day of your life. because God has called you. He did not call you to sit around and twiddle your thumbs and do nothing. He called us to be active. We can pray for peace, but the question on the table is, are we peacemakers? Do we engage in activity that positively engenders peace? Do we get engaged in an environment that, like God would say to Ezekiel in Ezekiel chapter 33, I sought for a man who would stand between me, in the gap between my people and me, but I found none. You will find that when it comes to conflict and you try to mediate for peace, you become the target. Your motives are questioned. We find that all over the scriptures, that every single disciple, every single apostle died a tragic death, except John, who died on Patmos of natural causes. When you step into the sacred space, people will assume your motive. Nehemiah did the same. When Nehemiah stood up to rebuild Jerusalem, when nobody was doing anything, they said to him, yes, he wants to be the main guy. It's not true. We find the Bible replete in Amos, where he says, really? He says, I'm a vine dresser, and I'm a carer of no-kid sheep. I don't need this stuff in my life. But God had called me, and that's why I left that, and I'm doing this. The disciples could have carried on fishing, but they left that and did this. You see, brethren, when you and I step into that sacred space of being peacemakers, know this, that you will become the target. We need to wait patiently, and that's my third point, closing off this morning. Romans 8 says, those who hope for what they already have. But if we hope for what we do not have, we wait for it patiently. And what Paul is trying to tell us is that we hope what we don't see yet. Oh, but we know exactly how it's going to manifest. We know that when it does manifest, it's going to blow our mind far beyond what we could have asked for or even imagined. You see, that was Abraham's problem at that time. God promised him. But all the way while he was waiting, brethren, and we need to learn that we stop complaining and we stop grumbling while we wait and work. That was Abraham's problem at one point. God promised him a son, and he came to a point where he says, I'm tired of waiting. I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And then he went into a maiden, a handmaiden of his wife. It created a massive mess, which history attests to. And while we wait, it seems like nothing is happening. I want to read from Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of Romans chapter 8, verse 24 to 25. Waiting does not diminish us any more than waiting diminishes a pregnant mother. We are enlarged in the waiting. We, of course, don't see what is enlarging us. But the longer we wait, the larger we become, and the more joyful our expectancy. Maybe today you're feeling, wow, I'm growing impatient and I need to just trust God. You see, God, waiting does not diminish you any more than it diminishes a pregnant mother. You may be enlarged in the moment of waiting, but the longer you wait, the larger we become and the more joyful our expectancy. I looked at that metaphor and I thought to myself, while we are waiting, the more we are becoming, so that the day when God comes, we cannot just be a small crowd, but a massive throng of people who are expecting something far greater than this world could ever give us. And our job is, while we wait, we work, because that is clear from God's word. Sometimes you wait for hours, sometimes you wait for months, sometimes you wait for years. Maybe there's something today that you're asking God to fix in some way, and you don't understand what He's doing. Maybe you're struggling to understand that the one that you love so much has not turned his life to God, and you're puzzled and saying, why is it so hard? Well, God's promises are true. But he wants you to understand that God is acting in the heart of each person and that he loves every single person whom you love even more. And the reason he loves them more is because he gave his son as a ransom for them, who gave his life for them. And therefore, he qualifies for loving them more. I'm going to close with Isaiah 40, verse 30 and 31. And this was a wonderful brother in Job's favorite quote. Even the youths shall faint and be weary. The young men shall utterly fall. But those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not grow faint. Maybe today you're struggling and you need us to pray with you, the elders to pray with you. Oh, don't stress. Come, let's do that. Maybe today you're saying, this is the day I'm going to turn my life around and I want to be baptized into Christ. It will not be the first time I've got into a baptistry with my church clothes on, and it won't be the last. Nothing stands between us and God. Nothing. When it comes to him, he comes first. When we wait patiently, and we do to the best of our ability that which he's assigned to us. Let's stand and close with a final song this morning.